Sorry.
Well, hello. I'd like to welcome members, officers, and members of the public to this Licensing Regulation Committee. Before the meeting starts, I would like to invite the committee member and scrutiny officer to explain how proceedings will work. Chanel.
Thank you. If a member wishes to speak, they should use the speak button located on the microphone unit. The microphone will light up green and the chair will be alerted of your request to speak. When the chair invites you to speak, your microphone will be made live and will turn red, at which point you can speak. When requested to vote, voting will be via the yes, no, abstain buttons on your microphone unit. Details of how members voted will be shown on the screens around the room and the results will be visible on the YouTube stream. Are there any questions before we start the meeting? Back to chair, please.
Thank you, Chanel. Apologies for absence. I have received apologies from councillors Ruth Brown, Stephen Patmore, Stuart Willoughby, and Amy Allen. Are there any further apologies for members? Okay. Minutes of the meeting on the 30th of October 2023. For the purposes of clarification, as the question is sometimes raised, the minutes of the previous meeting can be moved and seconded by members who were not present at that meeting, although it is preferable that those who were not present should abstain from voting and commenting on the motion. I'd like to propose that we take as read and approve as a true record the minutes of the meeting of the committee held on the 30th of October 2023. Could I have a seconder, please? Councillor Elizabeth Dennis, thank you.
Yep, happy to second.
Thank you. Any comments? No? Okay, Chanel, can we go to the vote, please?
Chair, that motion's carried.
Thank you. Chair's announcements. In accordance with council policy, this meeting is being recorded. The recording will be available both on the council's YouTube channel as well as on council's ModGov site alongside the documents from this meeting. Members are reminded to make declarations of interest before an item. The detailed reminder about this and speaking rights is set out under Chair's announcements on the agenda. For the purposes of clarification, in order to vote on an agenda item at this meeting, a member must be present for the entirety of the debate and consideration of that item. If a member leaves the room at any point of the item, they will not be able to vote. A reminder that the IRP have a survey ongoing to assess council views on the current allowances scheme, as well as any suggestions for future allowances schemes. The deadline is to complete the survey is this Thursday, 17th of October, and the link has been emailed to all councillors. I've agreed to a change to the published agenda item order, and agenda items 7 and 8 will be taken ahead of agenda item 6. Notification of other business. I have had none. Public participation. There have been no public participation requests received. Item 7, exclusion of the press and public. I propose that under section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972, the press and public be excluded from the meeting on the grounds that the following report will involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 1 and 2 of part 1 of schedule 12A of the said act, as amended. Could I have a seconder, please? Councillor Dennis, thank you. Okay, can we go to a vote, please, Chanel?
Chair, that motion's carried.
Excellent, thank you. We'll now go into private session. Thank you. Welcome back to anyone watching on YouTube or on the ModGov site. We'll now go to item 6, the annual licensing report 2023-24 part 1. Steve Cobb to present.
Thank you. This is the bit where I tend to talk too much, so I'll keep an eye on people's faces, because I like the opportunity to talk when I can tell you how wonderful my team are and all the good work that they do. And obviously I can put it on record, so it's on YouTube as well, so that they can see that I'm grateful for the work that they do. And this report is all about them. It does show an awful lot of work, but it is predominantly the team that does it, not me. And I think that's really, really important. What's particularly important over the last reporting year is managed to do a restructure where one of my senior licensing officers was promoted to licensing team leader. And that has made a huge difference to how the team operates. It takes the day-to-day operation of the team away from me. And you'll see when we come on to some of the policies later on, it's important that I step back for reasons that will become apparent. So all credit to the person that has reached the team leader position. She's only been here, well, she's been here less than 5 years, and she's worked her way up from an assistant licensing officer to team leader, which reflects really well on her, but it also reflects really well on the opportunities that the council give as well to staff. So hopefully you've had an opportunity to read the report, and you'll be pleased to know that I'm not going to go through it in any great detail. I'll skim over it and just highlight the bits that are important to me, and you'll no doubt tell me the bits that are important to you. Section 2 is all the detail. That's particularly for new members to see all of the work that the service is responsible for. And just to explain that the licensing service sits in with another service, community safety, and I oversee both, which is one of the really important reasons why I needed a licensing team leader to take on a lot of the responsibility for me. So if we can move on to section 3, inspections. This is something that this committee triggered a couple of meetings back. Our inspection figures were very low as we came out of the pandemic. I had some issues with staffing. We was trying to help businesses get back out of the pandemic. And so we didn't do as many inspections as we would have liked. And this committee quite rightly pointed out that one of our important roles is public safety. We need to get out there and do risk-rated inspections. And so I promised this committee that we would introduce a new risk-rated inspection scheme that has now been introduced. And you can see from the numbers, we've more than doubled what we did last year. And we not only will that number be sustainable going forward, but we hope to increase it as well. But we've balanced it against risk ratings. So we're not inspecting for the sake of making you happy as a committee. We're risk rating them so that we inspect on the basis of the biggest risk to the public or where premises are known to breach conditions. So hopefully that is striking the right balance. It's certainly going down well with our license holders who like the opportunity to see us, because whilst we're inspecting, it gives them the opportunity to ask any questions that they have. Section 4, number of applications, that's separate in Appendix A. I don't propose to go into any great detail other than to say that it's the highest number of applications that we've had for 5 years, and it's the second most applications that we've had since we introduced this annual report. And what's particularly pleasing is the number of new applications that we've seen. We did lose businesses during the pandemic, sadly, but we're getting a steady stream now of new applications from new businesses starting up. And the number of new starts that we've had outweigh the number of businesses that we lost, which is obviously very positive for the district. Section 5, current licenses. Again, it's quite self-explanatory. The only thing I want to flag is our number of current licenses is the highest it's ever been since we started this reporting in 2017. So the team are very busy, and hence the reason I started off with praising up the officers that do all of this work. Again, section 6, the service requests, they've gone up again. We've tried to engage more with our customers, make ourselves more available, and that's naturally led to more inquiries coming in. Quite a big jump from last year, and that's an even bigger jump when you think that we have combined 3 of our previous individual appointments into one appointment, the new taxi driver appointment. So naturally our number of stats would go down because we've combined appointments into one, but even with that we've still gone up. So the number of engagements with our customers is good, and it means that we are liaising better with our customers, and we're getting a good number of people that are looking to become taxi drivers or private hire drivers, which is good because the taxi trade will say there's too many taxis out there. We still get comments that people can't get taxis at certain people that do taxi and private hire work as well as having other jobs mean that we've got taxis at very different points during the day, and hopefully get a good balance that meets public demand. Where did I get to? Section 7, licensing fees. I always worry when I talk about fees and cost recovery, and we've got the executive member for finance on the committee. But I'm pleased to be able to report that the resolution that this committee made many years ago about not subsidising our fees and getting full cost recovery where we're entitled to, we continue to abide by that. There is case law that says we have to do a full costing every 3 years. We do the full costing every 3 years, but equally, if we think that there's been movement in the fees, we would do it less than 3 years, where we do channel shift and improved ways of working, so our costs are accountability, because by law we cannot make a profit on our licensing fees. And we are lucky that the vast majority of our licensing fees are set locally, so we have control over them. The only fees that we don't have control over that are set locally is something that I complain about every year, is the Licensing Act fees that were set by government in 2005, and they were set too low, and they haven't been increased since. And we do don't like saying this, but we do lose money on the Licensing Act because those fees are too low. We have tried several times to get this raised at a national level, as all councils have, certainly without wishing to call people out. Councillor Dennis, as leader of the council, you certainly wrote and tried to get some action on this through our MPs. And we get somebody from the Home Office come to our licensing conference every year, and they say every year, we know that the fees are set too low, but we can't put them up because it would impact on the recovery of businesses. So it seems okay that we have to continue underfunded in these areas. So we are constantly battling as a team to find the most cost-effective way of delivering that particular service to minimise the loss. I don't think I can put it in any other terms than that. Mouse has stopped working now. Section 8, licensing hearings. The number of licensing hearings have gone down. We mediate quite a lot now. For those of you that have sat on this committee for some time, you will no doubt have sat on some hearings in the past where you thought, why are we here? Why are we having to decide this? This could have probably been thrashed out beforehand. So that's what we try to do. And if it goes to a hearing now, it's because we do need councillors to sit in judgment. It was really encouraging to see the last hearing that we had 3 of our newer members sitting on that subcommittee, and Councillor Johnson chairing as a chair for the first time under the Licensing Act. I think, without wishing to be patronising, that hearing went really, really well, and it bodes well for the future. We are very lucky that councillors throughout the time of the Licensing Act since 2005 have always done the job properly, whoever's been on the committee. And again, we remain unbeaten at court on challenges, and we want that to continue. We do currently hold our licensing hearings virtually. It was something that was introduced during the pandemic, whilst all your other council meetings have returned to face-to-face because they're held under the Local Government Act. Hearings under the Licensing Act are held under Licensing Act 2003, and it's separate hearing regulations that mean we can continue to sit virtually. And that was tested in court recently, and the court did say that it is okay to meet virtually under the Licensing Act. There have been discussions in the past, and I would be very surprised if there were not discussions tonight on whether virtual is the way forward, or whether there may be occasions when face-to-face is necessary, but I don't want to preempt that in case I'm wrong. Enforcement activity. Again, without tempting fate, we have had a reduced amount of enforcement we've had to do this year. We've had one big animal prosecution that was led on by the police, but my licensing team leader played a significant role in that in terms of, I was going to say hours of resource that was spent on it, but it wasn't hours, it was weeks, including her working at weekends and evenings. The gentleman has been convicted by the court of animal cruelty. For those of you that don't know, it's in the public domain. It's the Dangerous Wild Animal Cat Sanctuary in Codicott. He has been banned from keeping animals, but because of the specialist nature of the animals that are in his care, the judge delayed that ban until 14th of November to give him time to rehome his cats, because obviously the alternative to rehoming them sadly would be euthanizing the cats, and they are critically endangered and endangered species, so that's not really something we want to do. So we will be back in court in a few weeks' time. Sadly, he hasn't rehomed any of the cats yet, and it is unlikely that he will rehome the cats because they're old. He's taken them from zoos and collections that haven't wanted them, so it's really difficult to then give them back to people that didn't want them in the first place. So he is in a difficult position. He has tried to rehome, we are led to believe, but we're going to be in a difficult position mid-November of waiting to see what the judge decides in terms of what happens to those cats. And obviously under enforcement action, I've put in there that I make some decisions on taxi and private hire drivers that we discussed in closed session. Policy work, really important work. You've got 3 policies that you're considering tonight. And after tonight, you'll be pleased to know that you've got 3 more policies to consider at the end of February or March. That a bit like buses, you wait for them to come along and they all seem to come at once, and then you get a couple of years where you have no policies to consider. But policy making is an important function of this committee. You do actually set the policies, save for the Licensing Act and the Gambling Act policies. All other policies are set by you as a committee. And we will have 2 of our biggest policies to consider over the course of next year. We're doing the taxi policy that you will consider at a meeting in February, March time. But the big policy is the Licensing Act policy. So the alcohol, the entertainment, late night refreshment. We will be consulting on that next year. And for those of you that sat on subcommittees will know that's the policy you use to make your decision. So that's again a really important policy. Section 11. Channel shift, don't need to go into any detail on that. That just demonstrates the work that we're doing as officers to try and provide a more cost-effective service for our customers and looking at other ways of engagement. The closed Facebook page is the one that I want to highlight. That's working really well with taxi drivers. And that's something we're going to look to introduce to other trades as well, because it's a safe space where they can ask questions. We can respond, but instead of just responding on a one-to-one basis, obviously everybody sees that response, and so it stops them all asking the same question, which is really useful, and we can give them updates. Section 12, again, our project updates. They are relatively straightforward. The one that seems to have been hanging around for some time is the Women and Girls Safety Charter, that every time I look to launch it, we seem to have PERP that stops me launching it. But I'm assured that when the current PERP is over, there's not going to be any more. So we will be launching the Women and Girls Safety Charter in Hitchin through Hitchin Pub Watch, who are supportive of it, on the 1st of December, assuming that's a weekday. Pub Watches as well, Letchworth, Baldock and Royston, and then we'll look to go to the villages as well. The video has been completed for some time. 3 of you star in it. We're not recording it because we used all of the money to record it the first time round, and we just want to get it rolled out because it's a really important piece of work. And as you've seen from my report, we're looking to include violence against women and girls, safeguarding, white ribbon in all of our policies. And so this Women's Safety Charter is a really important piece of work that we're doing. The one disappointing thing in the report is the audit on HMOs that was not a particularly pleasant audit to read, because it did criticize the HMO process that was in place. I'm not looking to pass the buck, but as my report says, we inherited that from the environmental health team, who was severely overstretched during the pandemic. And it's not surprising that they were not able to keep up to date with some of that workload. What's fortunate for us is, as we've taken it over and looked to improve it, we've had SIAS come in and do an audit and point us in the right direction. We've been able to implement the changes that they recommend, and I think we've got a really robust HMO process now. I think I've talked enough. I don't think that needs to go to a vote, so I'm happy to leave it there and take any questions, Chair.
Thank you, Steve. Are there any questions for Steve? Councillor Tim Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Steve. That was very interesting. And thanks for your comments about the committee as well. This is my first meeting here too. I was interested to hear about the lack of or the low fees you said from the 2005 decision about the Licensing Act. Is there anything we can do then? I'm sure you've thought of this a lot, but you know, to renew that and reaffirm it at this stage of the committee, whether it's writing formal letters or making placards up and demonstrating or whatever, really. But is there something we can do as a group to get that where it should be rather than too low?
Yes, I think so. I don't think it does any harm to remind central government of this issue, particularly as we've had a change of government recently. We've got some new MPs in our district. I don't think it would. I don't think it could do any harm to raise it. Government or civil servants are aware of it, but whether new ministers are up to speed on how underfunded we are in that particular area, I don't know. So yeah, anything you as a committee can suggest to bring it to the attention of government would really appreciate.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think it's probably a good idea, isn't it? When was the last time it was raised? Is it a sort of annual thing, or?
I can't.
Is it every year? Yeah.
I think Councillor Dennis raised it every year while she was leader of.
Yeah. We seem to, you know, if it's going on every year anyway, but we should perhaps do that again as a new committee, and make it really quite a strong request, because if you're, you know, batting with one hand behind your back, it's not good, is it?
Thank you. That would be appreciated if this committee did choose to make a resolution that we can pass on to the local MPs. That may help.
Just for completeness, can we make that a resolution within these recommendations that we've got, so we can amend to add to that resolution? Okay. Would you like to propose that? Feel free.
Was that? Yep.
Okay. We'll come back to that then when we do the proposal for the recommendations. That's correct, isn't it? Procedurally.
I'll miss out the placard bit.
So, Tim, what I was saying, if you quickly jot down what you'd like to, when we come to proposing the recommendations and seconding, then you can
I think it's
propose for that amendment.
Okay, thank you.
Right, Councillor Dennis.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And I'm grateful to Councillor Johnson for raising that point about licensing fees. I think it's quite interesting that we've recently had a government consultation around planning and increasing planning fees, but the government has so far been silent on licensing. And I do know that this is something that colleagues of ours in the District Councils Network have been working towards, and I am still involved in that finance work stream as well. So if it is indeed a recommendation of this committee that some action is taken in that regard, I am also quite happy to take that away and continue lobbying via the District Councils Network to work on behalf of all districts across the country to ensure that licensing is effectively a service that is able to wash its own face when it comes down to the financing. My question, however, for Mr. Cobb on this is possibly slightly cheeky and maybe from a Hitchin perspective, even one that you could preempt. Mr. Cobb, could you remind the committee about this council's responsibilities when it comes down to scrap metal site licensing, especially given the continual issues that we face with particular locations in Hitchin. I think that that reminder would be slightly beneficial. Also, as if you may indulge me, Chair, a second question, the gambling inspections. I noticed that we had 7 last year and it's dropped down to 1, but clearly there's a lot of work in respect of consumer harm in the gambling area at the moment, and we do have a lot of vulnerable consumer venue over the last 12 months.
I did preempt your first question. I had a funny feeling that would come up tonight, but scrap metal licensing from a district council perspective is very, very frustrating. The only enforcement powers we have under scrap metal licensing is over how the site runs administratively. So do they keep their records? Can they prove that they don't trade in cash? That is pretty much the limit of what we can do. The enforcement work on the site. So if for example, there was a fire on the site, or there are problems with lorries attending sites, scrap falling off, them parking outside the site, causing noise nuisance, that falls to the Environment Agency to enforce. With the fires recently, we had a number of meetings with the Environment Agency, and it's all things that they're aware of. But unfortunately, there's nothing we as a distance away or those sorts of things because of the limit to what we can do. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to clarify that. In terms of the gambling inspections, the reason it went down this year is purely the risk rating basis. Last year, the inspections that we did with somebody from the Gambling Commission. And so they were very thorough inspections, and we didn't identify any issues at those betting shops. And so they were risk rated for a 2-yearly inspection. So they will be inspected in the coming reporting year. We haven't forgotten them, but we have to balance our resources on which is the biggest risk to the public at the time. And there were a number of licensed premises under the Gambling Act that we needed to prioritise.
Thank you, Steve. Okay, Councillor Ian Albert.
Cheers. Thanks, Chair. Three things. One more than Elizabeth. Elizabeth has partly asked the question I was going to ask on scrap metal, because you knew I was going to ask that. But I think it would be sensible, first of all, obviously, I think perhaps for future, or indeed even now, for it to be included in the annual report as a statement. And obviously, at the moment, it shows that we haven't done any inspections, I think, on the table, if I understand the table rightly. And I think that seems probably remiss. Not that I necessarily think you would have found anything in terms of the remit that we've got, but necessarily I think it isn't a good look actually that where there have been significant problems with fires at the 2 Hitchin scrap metal places. And I think it would seem that, you know, I think it's important for us, I think, to show that we are doing what we need to do in terms of inspections and so on. And I think it would look odd to do otherwise, but certainly I think something in the report. The second area, I'd also be interested to know a bit more what you're thinking and the team are thinking of doing around HMOs, the households of multiple occupation. I asked about this last year. This is, I know, Steve, is a bit of you don't know what you don't know, and this is a real problem. And how whether there's ways that we can join up with our Revs and Ben's team and trying to understand the totality of the picture. But I think obviously just sort of thinking through what is the sort of inspection routine that you and the team are looking to carry forward. And the final thing is probably, and this probably is a sort of a question, and I think, you know, thank you and all the team for all the work they do on licensing and certainly licensing some of the big events. It still feels, however, odd to me that when we do have a licensing hearing, that actually it's on sometimes a relatively small subject. And yeah, I suspect that probably the post bag, at least of I think of some sort of councillors, particularly perhaps in Hitchin, is around some of the bigger events that go on, for example, at Hitchin Priory, where we as a licensing committee aren't involved in those, and we can look at a whole raft of numbers of those sort of things around the district. Now, these events are hugely important. They are revenue raising, they're good for business, they're good for our residents who want to attend, and obviously people come from far and wide. So it's good for the local economy. But I guess the question, it still feels to me that actually that I'm surprised that we've never had actually a hearing or a real discussion as a committee or as a licensing subcommittee around what actually is the happening on those events, and also to how we get councillors involved in the process, and it may well be that the delegation and your delegated decisions are absolutely fine, but it is how we maybe involve local councillors in the process that leads up to the safety group discussions and so on, which are largely invisible to us as councillors. So it's how we can get involved in those things. So in some senses, we can actually reassure our residents that all of these things have been covered, or that there's nothing, I'd say nothing to worry about, but these are things that we know that have been there. So it's how we maybe involve councillors a bit more, not necessarily in even a hearing, but actually in the safety group process that discusses those licenses of some of the big events around the district.
Thank you. Steve?
Thank you. That's a useful comment on the scrap situation, and I'll certainly make sure that that's in the report going forward. And I totally accept your point as well, but the fact that we haven't done any inspections at the moment doesn't look great, given that we've had 3 fires down there recently. And so I'll task one of my officers with going out and inspecting all of the sites within where are we now? In this month. So we will get an inspection done, because there are things we can do. I know one of the site, for example, I know has some scrap metal that spills over the back fence onto the walkway by the river. That we can deal with that, and so that's something that we can pick up in the inspection. So happy to do that. In terms of HMOs, again, I agree with you. The priority for us on HMOs up until now has been getting a system that's robust and is workable and withstands scrutiny by our auditors. We're in that position now. But one of the questions the auditors did ask is, what are we doing about what we don't know? And so one of my officers, my senior officer, has been tasked with HMOs. He will work with Revs and Bens to see what information we can get from them. But there are a number of specific websites where you can look at renting properties, and it's just some simple research of looking to where we believe HMOs are. The difficulty we have, I'm not looking for excuses, but we have no right of entry into a residential property that, unless we have grounds to genuinely believe that it's an HMO, and in which case we could get a court warrant. But equally, when properties have been brought to our attention before and we've knocked on the door and said, we're here because we believe you're an HMO, there was one instance where they said, oh, yes, we are. Sorry, what do we need to do? And we got them licensed. So, yes, we can be more proactive in that area. And hopefully you'll see in the next year's annual report that our number of HMOs have gone up, because there is undoubtedly more out there than we believe that they're currently, or the stats currently say. In terms of the big events at Hitchin Priory, that's a difficult one, because we do get lots of feedback from members of the public saying, how did you allow this event to go ahead? If I'd have known, I would have had my say. Our hands are tied somewhat in that when an application comes in for a big event, there's a prescribed advertising process. Sorry if I'm telling you what you already know, but a notice goes up on the premises that invariably people don't see. An advert goes in the Comet that I understand doesn't get delivered to most houses, and it's advertised on our public register. I think we could perhaps do some more publicity around our public register. Maybe we could look to do an Outlook article to say that we have got this register now. It does list all of our applications, and it would be a way of getting it to the attention of people. But the Licensing Act ties our hands. If nobody objects, we have no alternative other than to grant the license. And when we explain that to members of the public, nobody objected, so the license was approved. Invariably, we get told, well, if we'd have known about it, we'd have objected. So it's how do we get that information out there? I think things have improved because, again, as a recommendation coming out of this committee, we email the ward members now about every application, and ward members are doing a good job in disseminating the information around the ward so people know about it. It's a really good point on SAG. I hadn't thought about that. SAG is Safety Advisory Group it's restricted to professionals giving advice to the applicant or the license holder. But that doesn't mean that we couldn't report to the ward members the key details, almost like a summary sheet of what SAG has discussed to try and put residents' minds at rest. Certainly Councillor Tyson with the events that he has at Bygrave, there's a lot of public anxiety about those events and what we've done for Councillor Tyson in the past. Just a summary of what the event's going to be, that there is a traffic management plan in place. There are going to be traffic lights here. So if you think that that would be useful for us to do to all events, I'm sure we could summarise SAG feedback that you can disseminate out to your people that live in your ward to perhaps put people's mind at rest that there is work going on behind the scenes to make sure that nuisance is kept to a minimum, that the public are safe, and that we're trying to strike that balance that it says in our licensing policy, particularly in town centres, about balancing a vibrant town centre against what is reasonable for residents to put up with.
Yeah, would you like to come back on that, Councillor Abbott?
Cheers. Yeah, thanks, Chair. And yes, I think that would be really helpful, Stephen. And I think also just to say, in relation to say, particularly some of the, I mean, Hitchin Priory, but I'm sure there's other examples in other towns that where we've got more of a town-wide event, then actually I think make sure that maybe the kind of, for example, Hitchin councillors are there. So, for instance, there are significant people issues in the Hitchin Priory event, in people coming out of the Hitchin station and walking, and all the signage and all those, and taxis, traffic, and so on. So I think it's important. It goes beyond just purely it's in this particular ward. It actually affects the kind of wider town, in, for example, the train stations and buses and so on. So I think it'd be good to understand that where we've got a town-wide event, if that's possible. I don't want to obviously put too much burden on the team, but I think with that kind of thing, it's useful to sort of spread that information a bit wider around to the councillors, and not just those purely in the ward it happens to be located in.
I think that's a really good. I think that's a really good point. Because we get so many phone calls, it does appear to us that customers are saying, "What are you actually doing in terms of these events?" So if councillors are prepared to act almost like as go-betweens between us, no doubt you're the people that get many more phone calls than we do about these events, or you get stopped in the street. If we can give you some basic information for you, I am more than happy to do that.
I'm just going to very briefly go to Councillor Mason because he wanted to come back on specifically on this. If anyone else wants to come back on specifically on this, just quickly stick your hand up and I'll come to you just after. Thank you, Keith. I will.
Thanks, Chair, and apologies for jumping in front of colleagues. I just wanted to reiterate what Ian said. I mean, I think the Priory one really, I know that Ian raised this last year about it. It is interesting that very small village fates or something come to the licensing committee, and then Nebworth doesn't, or whatever. It is curious, but I was surprised with the Priory one because it was such a big thing. Because they were quite big concerts, and there were 4 of them or 5 of them, 4 of them, and it did have an impact, as Ian said, on Hitchin. It seems strange as both a member of this committee and as a Hitchin councillor. I didn't feel anything. And I think I'm slightly, with the utmost respect to the comment, unfortunately, the days of taking out a full page ad in a comment and everyone's going to see it, I wish that was still the case, but probably not. And it's, I guess, trying to find ways around that, because otherwise people will always say, well, no one ever told me, I didn't get a chance to object. No matter what we do, hire an aeroplane to fly up and down right in the sky, and people are still going to say that. But I think it falls into do as much as we can to reasonably to help people. And I thought with that one possibly, maybe we need to do more. So just wanted to reiterate what Ian said. Thanks, Alice.
Well, sorry.
I think that's really important, because it's clear to us that these bigger events, people are not seeing them. It's unfortunate for applicants that they have to put very expensive adverts in the comment that we know nobody's going to read, but that's what the legislation says. And we have to be careful, because we can't be seen to be encouraging comments in the same way that planners can under planning legislation, because there's been case law that says that if you're seen to be soliciting comments on a licensing application, then you're open to challenge. So we tried to find that halfway house of giving the information to the ward members to disseminate it. But it's a really good point that Councillor Albert made, that events like this don't just affect the ward that they're in, they affect more than one ward, and we should perhaps look to circulate that information more widely across all of the councillors in the towns when these events happen. And I do think it would be a good way forward to remind our customers that we have got a public register. The application's always on there, so it's not just a case of there's going to be an application, for example, in Hitchin. It will list down exactly what they're applying for, what days, what times, what sort of things they're going to do to try and mitigate concerns. And we really need to get people looking at that register more often, and then we might get more customer engagement as well. But yeah, certainly there is an enhanced role for ward members, and we'll work with you to do what we can to get that information out there without going across that boundary that would be seen to be soliciting.
On the basis that what I think has perhaps been suggested here is that surrounding wards or town wards as well get made. Is that something that you want us to formally resolve, or is this good enough instruction from this committee, just from the basis of this?
I'm happy to take it as an instruction from the committee and implement it. And then when we look to formally revisit our licensing policy over the course of next year for the Licensing Act, we can cement it in that policy.
Yeah, you have that. Okay. Councillor Hoskins wanted to just come in on specifically on this, didn't you?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I don't want to labour the point particularly, but as we're discussing this, and it was quite a big issue, I take all of the points that fellow councillors have brought up, and I'm really pleased that we're going to be doing this in more detail. I think as the ward councillor there, I'd have been particularly pleased to have been engaged in the SAG discussion on this, because there is some local knowledge that perhaps isn't always known. The only example I can give is the huge articulated lorries that came into Bridge Street and Tilehouse Street to dump off equipment, and they just couldn't cope with it, and they're doing like 28-point turns in a narrow residential street. So these are the sorts of things I think that we as local members could bring into an early stage of the SEG discussions. Thank you.
So can I just add to that, and then so you can come. Is there a possibility of including ward members in the SAG meetings?
Ideally, no. Ironically, we've just had some training on safety advisory group from a guy called Eric Stewart. That's one of the groups, and he's adamant that councillors and members of the public should not be invited to SAG because it should be seen to be professionals in the field. However, thinking outside the box, if you can't, as ward members, go to a SAG to give your feedback, how about prior to a SAG being held, the case officer, because each application I allocate a case officer to, how about the case officer contacts the members and basically extracts all of your local knowledge so that he or she can then go to the safety advisory group and put forward all of the comments that you would have made had you been able to be there.
Would you like to come back on that, Keith?
Yeah, thanks. I'm not at all offended that you don't want me at meetings, but so I think that's probably the next best option. So I'd be grateful for that. Thank you.
Okay, just checking. You okay to take that instruction rather than us having to do an additional?
Yeah, I should have made it clear. The role of this committee and the purpose of the annual report is for you to give me an instruction on how you think we should be operating as a team. So even if there's not a formal resolution, if it's something the committee wants, we will put it into practice.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, I will get to you guys, I promise you. But I do have Councillor Dennis who's going to come back on this specific thing, and then that'll be the last one that's coming back on this specific thing.
I'm really, really sorry.
Yeah.
And, and
Longer than most of the act at the primary, actually, to be fair.
I mean, I think Councillor Albert did an excellent job of trying to bag potential tickets should Oasis decide to do a reunion tour at Nebworth, because clearly that's what this is aimed at. However, in the spirit of instruction rather than resolution, Mr. Cobb, this committee, I realise we're in question mode, so I shall frame this as a question, Chair. Would you be prepared to take away as an instruction rather than a resolution of the committee that the licensing manager draft and publish an article in the next Outlook magazine providing details of the licensing register and encouraging residents to check this regularly and comment upon applications in their area, effectively capturing the point that was raised sort of and responded to by Councillor Albert, but effectively instructing you to do so. I'm happy to raise that as a resolution when we get to that relevant point, but if you can take it as an instruction, that might be tidier.
I'm happy to take that as an instruction and implement it.
Going off of that, actually, would it be sensible to have something about it in every Outlook? Just a reminder, check here. Fine. Oh, okay. Fine. Annually, you want it annual, but not, or just this one time?
Surely. More than that would be overkill.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Sean, on the trend of it, apparently you now have to come up with 4 things to talk about. Councillor Prendergast, please.
Thanks, Stephen. Thanks, Chair. Firstly, I just want to say it's an excellent document. It's easy to read, easy to follow. So thank you to you and your team for your hard work on this. Just a couple of comments. Firstly, I'm really pleased to see that the good work with taxi trade is still ongoing at the quarterly meetings. I trust they're still beneficial, and I look forward to seeing some of those service improvements in the policy that we look at in the new year. On the women's safety chart, I know it's been a long time coming, but nevertheless, it does provide an opportunity. Hopefully it does go ahead on the 1st December, because that ties in with the 16 days of action. I don't know if that was behind your thinking, but it's between the 25th of November to the 10th of December. So that's a good date for that to happen. And please, let's make sure it's on the 1st of December. In respect of HMOs, Ian kind of stole my question, but I just want to follow up on a couple of those things. And apologies if I've missed it. I can see we did 20 inspections in 23-24. How does that compare to the amount of HMOs we are aware of?
I'm going to try and talk now and look up something at the same time, so this could go disastrously wrong.
I've got a couple more.
Thank you for your comments on taxis, and what I failed to mention was the work that we've done on taxis, the setting up of the taxi forum, the fact that we've got a taxi trade, and the fact that we meet regularly with the taxi trade was something that was introduced while you was executive member. So I'm sure you didn't raise it for that purpose, but in the same spirit that you congratulated the team for the work that they do, then you should be congratulated for instigating that in the first place. The safety charter will go ahead. We received funding to do it from the Police and Crime Commissioner's office. We have to report back to the Police and Crime Commissioner's office, and we are being chased for that outcome now. So I can assure you that I will allocate an officer to roll that out in Hitchin in December, because we want it in place for Christmas, being a peak period. And no disrespect to the other towns, but Hitchin is the busier town at the festive period. It's got the most effective pub watch, and it's the logical place to start, but we will be rolling it out in other towns as well. In terms of the HMO inspections, we are still catching up. We inherited a situation, I explained, that was unfortunate, but justifiably unfortunate because of the previous officers that dealt with it and their workload. But we've focused our inspections on making sure that every one of our HMOs that we are aware of has been inspected and is up to standard against the policy that this committee adopted, I want to say last year, but it could have been the year before, certainly within the last 2 years. What we need to look to do now is start to re-inspect, because an HMO license lasts for 5 years. So if it was licensed at initial grant by Environmental Health, it's due for another inspection. Some of them haven't had their HHSRS inspection, the hazard inspections. It's something that our environmental health team will still be looking to do for us because it's a specialist in. We are outsourcing that at the moment. So our priority at the moment is to get every HMO that we know about inspected, all of the HHSRS inspections complete, and then build on that with the work that the officer will be doing to try and establish what other HMOs are out there, because we know there are more HMOs out there. And also we've got to look at taking on some of the additional properties that now fall within HMO licensing as well. So I can't remember the technical term for it, but it's where building sets property guardianships. They've always been exempt from HMO licensing, but the court has ruled recently that they are HMOs. So any property guardianship companies that we've got operating in the district, we need to focus on them to make sure that they're licensed. And then as the officer does more of a troll of the sites and working with our colleagues in housing, because there's a wealth of information in there, as you'll know, being an executive member, and looking to up that number. And certainly going forward, now we have processes in place, an HMO license would not be granted until it had a full inspection by us. And we've also got a buy-in from the fire service that they will do a fire inspection before we grant a new HMO as well. Did that answer your question? Because you're looking puzzled.
Well, I know this is a lot of hard work, and I know you've picked up a difficult job. My concern is that we don't know the number of HMOs. I'm sure we'll get to the point where we know about a lot of them, if not potentially all of them. But I suspect a lot of residents are aware of HMOs, but don't necessarily know to report it or whatever it may be, and that they need to be licensed, for example. So feeding on to Ian's point, we do need to find a way of working collaboratively to find out that information, whether it be with the parking team, whether it be with the community safety team, because there'll be lots of snippets of information that will give us intelligence around HMOs in the district. We need to find a way of joining up that so we can locate more of the HMOs. But I do appreciate you've picked up a particularly difficult job in this area. But it's something we do need to try and get on top of. And then on my final point on HMOs, more out of curiosity than anything else, because I don't expect you to go into each and every recommendation. The meeting would have gone forever, I suspect, if we did that. But at the bottom at 3.1, I think it's excellent that you've managed to take on board those recommendations. But it says at the time of the report, there was 2 outstanding. Have those been completed? Time of writing the report. 3.5.
Yeah, you're quite right. No, those 2 haven't been completed yet. They're due for completion by the 31st of October. I shouldn't have used really at the time of writing this report, because I only wrote it last week. But that was probably not the best of phrases. But they are 2 low risk recommendations. We've put all of the high risk recommendations in place. One of them that is still outstanding is checking on the rogue landlord database, to which we're struggling to get access with at the moment. And the other one is, what are we doing about finding out what we don't know, which ties in very nicely to the points that we're raising. And I totally agree with you about ways of finding out about HMOs. We normally find out about them because we get members of the public complain about excessive parking in the area. And then we have a similar situation to we have with scrap metal yards, that people say, you license scrap metal yards, so can you please stop them from catching fire? We also get people saying, you license HMOs, can you stop them parking in the street? Parking's not something we can address, but it is a good way of identifying HMO. So if there's any other suggestions that you have for ways that we can find them with your knowledge in housing, that would be really appreciated.
Did you want to come back on that?
Well, I do think there are some fairly simple ways, which I can feed back to you. But one of them is by simply encouraging residents to report HMOs. I know it's really straightforward, but having a dedicated page for HMOs, people should know that what the council is doing on HMOs. So something as simple as that will have some impact at least. But working with registered housing providers who will know their local areas particularly well, for example, tapping into Settle, First Garden Cities homes. Just one final question on the audit that was carried out. Do they come back and monitor whether those recommendations have been word escapes me, but it's been implemented?
Yeah, we're double monitored. The performance officer of the council monitors that we comply, and that's fed back to the finance audit and review committee to make sure that we do it, but then SIAS come back at an agreed date to make sure that we've put all of those recommendations in place as well.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
I was going to make you happy and say I pressed it half an hour ago. And I can't remember, but I can actually. And I could cobble together 5 or 6 to just win, but I won't. The first comment actually is just an aside, really. I can't actually believe, I know it's the training guy you mentioned, but how the person can say that a ward councillor shouldn't come to the SAG when that person surely is fantastically placed, you know, as you say, to stop 28-point turns. It just beggars belief, but that's just an aside, really. I originally pressed the button to speak about the scrap metal aspects, Steve, and I just know from previous career experience that I'm sure you've had liaison with Hertfordshire Constabulary in detail, but that they very regularly do proactive operations county-wide but visiting very proactively scrap dealers. And is it time perhaps again to perhaps reach out to them? I take on board that you say that you have these limited powers, but perhaps a partnership approach with us going in tandem with Herts Constabulary to, for want of a better phrase, the problematic place you're talking about, a shot across their bows. Maybe it's high time to do that. Is that something that's on the agenda?
It's certainly possible. We work with our police colleagues on scrap metal in general. So we have operations periodically where, without wishing to be too stereotypical, we pull over white vans and we make sure that they're licensed to trade in scrap if they are trading in scrap. In terms of the scrap metal yards themselves and the problems that we're experiencing there, with the best agency to work with at the moment, given the problems that are there, are Herts Fire and Rescue, because they have, although they don't have specific scrap metal enforcement powers, they do have their normal fire protection team that's working with the Environment Agency and putting in place some action plans. So it's no real consolation to the residents, but the first fire at Nationwide was a bad fire. The second fire could have been a lot worse, but measures that had been put in place requested by the first fire service reduced the impact of that fire. And the fire authority have also been able to put some pressure on HEC to try and remove lithium-ion batteries from small domestic appliances being stored at those sites, which invariably are the ones that cause the problem. I don't have any issue with looking at doing some joint visits with our police colleagues. I just caveat that with they are particularly overstretched at this moment in time. There are some officers down that have been moved to more high crime areas in the district, but I'll certainly look into it.
Would you like to come back on that?
Yeah, if it's okay. Yeah, point taken completely. I just I feel that with the fire service, ourselves and the police going as a joint effort. I mean, I've still got the contacts, and I've been liaising for issues in my ward and in Royston in general on behalf of our party in Royston. If you like, we can speak offline at some point and see if. I think they probably rub their hands with glee, the community guys in Hitchin, given the opportunity to go in there with us and with the fire service to, as I say, at the very least, put some proactivity around them rather than just let them operate as they perhaps think they can do. We can perhaps do that if you'd like me to. Yeah. I can email you if that's all right with you, Chair.
That's okay, Chair. Can I take that conversation offline with Councillor Johnson and take some advantage of his expertise?
I'm sure if any member of the committee could, if they have any issues or concerns, can always talk to Steve offline.
Great. Could I, without labouring things, can I just talk about the HMO side of things as well? Sean's quite right. I haven't got any experience really of HMOs, so I'm quite new to it. But maybe is it as simple as time again now to perhaps get an article with a friendly journalist asking the public to report these things? I know that potentially could open a can of worms. It's interesting to hear that you say that nobody reads the comment. Well, I'll take your word for that. I know in Royston people do read the Crow. It's not delivered anymore, but the Tesco's, the big Tesco's in Royston and one or two other outlets seem to spend half my life there. There's a huge pile on Thursday, and it's gone by Friday morning. So people do read it. So I think it will resonate, and maybe getting an article published sooner rather than later will will bear fruit. Yeah.
Happy to take that as an instruction, Chair.
Absolutely. And I will say, in Baldock, we have the same thing with the comment. Huge pile gone by halfway through the day. So it does get rid. And I think that's a really good idea.
I'll certainly look into it, and at the risk of them watching, it would be nice to find a friendly journalist that's not into council bashing rather than doing something to help the council. But I can say that maybe you guys can't.
Of course, we like to work with all the journalists who are very good. Did you want to come specifically on this part? And then I'll come to you. Sure.
Yeah, it's a really good point that Tim raised, and actually on that point, because you said it earlier, you approached the HMO and they didn't even know that they had to be licensed, for example. So it could be actually appealing to owners who have HMOs who are perhaps none the wiser that they need to be licensed, because I suspect there's probably a fair quantity of them.
Definitely. I think we've got somewhere between 35 and 40 licensed. I think that's just scratching the surface.
Thank you. Ian.
I won't prolong, but there's going to be a meeting that we're arranging for a week on Friday to discuss scrap metal fires specifically in Hitchin. I don't know whether you're on the cast list for that, Steve. I'll check. I'll go away and check, because obviously it's the county council organising the meeting. But I think actually I was really keen that the wider range of regulatory authorities are present there for that meeting, and that includes obviously North Arts, the police, fire, and usual round of Environment Agency and so on. But it's meetings on week on Friday. But I'll certainly make sure if you're not on the cast list that you or someone from the or Joe Doggett should be there on behalf of the council. I mean, it might be Anthony Roaches might be coming as well, but we can sort that out.
Yeah, again, happy to attend. That's one of the real positives that's come out of this. There's been some really good cross-agency work. Scott Cruddington chaired a number of meetings where HCC, Environmental Agency, us, Fire were present. And I think it's important that we do show a united front to these issues. So if I'm available, I'm more than happy to go.
Excellent. Are there any more questions? And we may have forgotten that we're on questions, not debate yet. We've still got some bit to go on this item. But are there any more questions on this item? No, in which case, I do have one. And you're going to like it because it's you've anticipated it. Can we have subcommittees in person? Subcommittee hearings in person. I'm quite keen that we have that as an option. I don't think it's needed for every single one, but I think in-person meetings can have very good conversation, and I think they can have a slightly more positive effect on times than virtual meetings. That's been my experience having across both. Obviously I've only done a couple of hearings and they've both been virtual, and I think my feeling is that they actually take longer virtually than they would in person, because there is a kind of a lapse in communication slightly. I don't know what other committee members feel about this, but it is a question I'm putting out.
Okay, I'll be keen to hear other members' views on that. The reason that we took the view to continue with virtual hearings, to put some context on it, is there is high officer attendance at these meetings. We need a licensing officer there. We need a solicitor there that's quite often based some distance away, because we've got contract solicitors at the moment. Very heavy resource for our colleagues in democratic services. So we've maintained the virtual hearing for that reason, and also because we got more attendance from objectors. We found that if they had to give up time to come here during the day, particularly if they were working, it wasn't practical for them. But if we hold them virtually, then they can log in from work or wherever they are. That said, there are going to be occasions, if there was a large quantity of objectors, I think that would be quite difficult to manage virtually. And if you get some vociferous speakers, it can be quite difficult to manage those virtually. So not trying to preempt what the chair's pushing for, and not having heard what you'll think yet. My personal preference would be that we maintain the default of virtual hearings, but whoever is going to chair the subcommittee, if there's good cause to suggest that it should be held face to face, then we look at doing that, but it would be subject to officer resource, because these hearings, although they may not look at to the public looking in, are very resource intensive.
I will go to some further comments momentarily. Yeah, the few. Perhaps I will just say then perhaps we could think maybe hybrid rather than everyone being here, but that's an option. But first, I will go to Councillor Johnson, please.
Thanks, Chair. And like yourself, I've sat just on 2 subcommittees, but I fully agree with you, Steve. Actually, I think if managed properly, which it isn't always easy online, but if managed properly and the rules are set out, then actually it's better to hold them virtually. Certainly the ones I've sat on, and I count myself lucky to have chaired the last one. I think we made it very clear on both of those. I think Ian chaired the first one I was on. But it was made extremely clear to all participants what the roles were, and they had absolutely every opportunity. And I don't think, I take the point, the last one was actually really long. We were both on it, weren't we? I think that was just the nature of that beast, really. I don't think it dragged on particularly. So, personally speaking, I'd nail my colours to the virtual mast.
Thank you. Cool. Councillor Dennis.
Thank you, Chair. And I speak with the benefit of having chaired a number of licensing subcommittees, both in person and virtually. And I can attest that whether a licensing subcommittee is in person or indeed virtual, if it needs to continue, then it will continue. And you can spend equally as long in person, if not longer, sometimes as well. It is merely the nature of the beast and the nature of that particular application. There are a significant number of benefits, obviously, of having virtual meetings. They can reduce costs. They can be administratively easier as well. But then equally, there can be disbenefits. For example, obviously, we now have a reserve member on standby should somebody drop connection, or indeed, as almost happened on one committee that I was chairing, be subject to a fire alarm in the building that they are trying to participate in the meeting from, and potentially risk not being able to get back online. So it is a tricky situation. I hear what the licensing officer says as well about the chair of the subcommittee determining the format of that subcommittee. But given at the moment, the chair of the subcommittee is determined by the members of said subcommittee on the day that the committee sits, that seems to me administratively to be unworkable. I think hybrid meetings are absolutely the future. I think that they are the direction that local government ought to be taking for the majority of meetings. And as colleagues will know, I see no reason why non-regulatory committees cannot sit, in fact, as hybrid meetings. It seems a nonsense to me that if a member is presenting but not a member of a particular committee in an authority, they still need to be physically present within the room. But I'm not responsible for the decisions the last government made, thankfully. But we have the freedom, we have the flexibility in this space with our subcommittees. So it perhaps might be something for members of this committee and for the chair and for officers to take away and consider outside of this space, rather than seeking to define our subcommittee structure here and now this evening. Because I think more likely than not, there will be certain applications where a virtual meeting is indeed more expedient, but there might be other meetings where you have wider public interest that you would want an in-person or perhaps a hybrid meeting, especially with some of the constraints that colleagues at County Council have. I'm mindful that it can be quite tricky, for example, to get highways officers in the room to any type of committee at a district meeting. And maybe by having a hybrid or virtual meeting, we might achieve our objective of having those voices present.
Thank you. Councillor Prendergast.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think Councillor Dennis has answered my question. I think on balance, I agree with Councillor Johnson. My question is, do we have that flexibility to... We don't have that flexibility. Right. So is that set in?
It's well, you could, if you look through the licensing report, it currently it's virtual unless it's one of the larger at once. So I think what I'm sort of putting forward is the idea that we could have that flexibility to make a decision as necessary rather than have it set in the way that it currently is.
Okay, so we don't have that flexibility to go. It must always be online.
It's currently,
Yes,
yeah. Thanks, Albert.
Yeah, I think you probably answer my question that I wasn't sure where that flexibility lay, because I think in principle I'd still favour virtual meetings, but I can see where there might be an opportunity, and that was the point I was going to make in terms of the larger applications and maybe with a very large number of objectors. It might then be easier to have a face-to-face session. I think whilst in principle, I think I support what Councillor Dennis said around hybrid meetings. I think the danger is what you wouldn't want to have, I think, is a hybrid meeting where you've got one panel member present and two members online, or vice versa, and so on. So I think that the hybrid part is about how we encourage participants, whether it's objectors or the applicant or regulatory authorities come along. What we wouldn't want, as I say, is that mixed panel of some people here and some people somewhere else and so on. That I think that would be much harder. But in principle, I still favour, for the majority of the time, carrying on with virtual meetings.
Thank you. Oh, I did have, okay. Just come back on.
Well,
I suppose I mean based on that, I can absolutely understand. I think it would be sensible to keep the default of virtual. My personal preference would be that we also introduce the flexibility to have a hybrid or virtual. But to be clear, the hybrid aspect would not be the subcommittee members. It would be the additional participants.
Can I come back very quickly to say that I think it was Councillor Dennis said it, that can we take this discussion away to have outside the meeting, because the Licensing Act policy is coming early next year that will go out to consultation. And if you think about what your position wants to be, it's something that we could look to embed in that policy going forward.
Yeah, is everyone happy with Councillor Johnson?
Just really quickly to reaffirm, I just think availability, I'm speaking personally, but availability, if it's in person, is going to be really problematic. That 2 weeks ago was really long. So I know that's just one snapshot, but I think it's really important that across the board, especially when you talk about all the background officers and the work that goes in, I think we should stick with virtual.
Thank you. We'll talk about it. I think we'll take your advice and we'll talk about it further offline. In the meantime, if there are no other questions of any other sort, we will move on to the recommendations. So the recommendations currently are that the committee 2.1 review the annual report and comment on its content. I think we've done that very well. And 2.2 note the annual report. And I'm sure we're going to do that well too. So, right. I know that Councillor Johnson has an amendment. So I think if I take a proposer in Councillor Johnson, he can add the amendment within his proposal. So that's probably the easiest way of doing it. Would you like to be the proposer and bring your amendment and propose your amendment as well?
I will do. It's not quite on the back of a fag packet. So I'm proposing. Would you like me to the form of words?
So this would be an additional recommendation. So that the committee 2.3 does
right. Words to the effect of, I won't be offended if some people would like to edit this, but we as the Licensing Committee of North Herts Council request the government urgently review the Licensing Act fees set 19 years ago in 2005 to raise and bring them in line with current fiscal pressures in 2024.
Okay. Do we have to have a specific action? So we're calling on the government. Are we just is that being noted in this, or are you asking that as a committee we write to the government?
Yes, sorry, yes.
And that we write to the government.
Yes.
With that, the committee writes, or the chair or the leader of the council.
I'd be guided on that, whichever's the strongest, really. Yeah, the leader.
That's a good question. I'd have to be guided on that. as this is a specialist licensing committee charged with overseeing the licensing function, maybe we try the route of the chair of this committee, right? Particularly as we've got the executive member for finance on the committee as well.
Councillor Johnson.
Yeah, the same as you, Steve. I'd be guided, but that sounds very reasonable, doesn't it?
Well, I'm happy to take that action. We've got a proposer. Does everyone understand what the proposal is? And you're also proposing the rest of the substantive motion with that amendment, to be clear.
Yeah, can I just maybe clarify the
Yes,
wording
please,
on
yeah.
that slightly? So that we request. I'm sort of changing it slightly from what you've said, Councillor Johnson. So to request that the chair of the Licensing and Regulation Committee write to the government to urgently request that they review the Licensing Act fees set 19 years ago in 2005 to raise and bring these in line with current fiscal pressures in 2024. So I think it's fairly similar. It's just request that the chair of the Licensing and Regulation Committee write to government to urgently request that.
Yeah.
Great.
Great.
So
Okay,
you
thank
need a
you.
seconder for that.
Yeah, in which case, could I have a seconder for that, please? That was very quick. Sure. Councillor Prendergast a second. Thank you. God, you should do like some sort of cowboy. Okay, in which case, we've got a proposer and seconder, so we now go to the debate. Did you just press your button? Keith? No. Oh, you wanted to... Well, I've got no request to debate, so could we please go to the vote? You're getting a bit antsy. Right.
Chair, the motion's carried.
Yes, yeah. Sorry, and that's passed. Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Chanel. Right, I'm now proposing that we have a comfort break. Is 5 minutes enough time? Give me a quick nod, or we can do it slightly longer if you needed. We'll say 5 minutes, but if you take slightly longer, we're not going to start without you. Thank you for all being so prompt, other than welcome back, everyone. Right. Don't make me bang the gavel. Item 9, statement of gambling. Number 9, item 9, statement of gambling principles 2025 to 2028. Steve Cobb to present.
Hey, me again. All right, hopefully you've all had an opportunity to read the proposed policy, and you'll see that it doesn't actually propose any significant changes. It's a statutory policy that by law we have to review every 3 years and adopt on the 3rd of January on those 3 yearly cycles. So 3rd of Jan 2025 is the next one. The adoption is reserved for full council. It's one of the 2 policies that is reserved for full council. So we'll be going to full council in November, I believe, based on what you recommend tonight. We only had 3 representations come in to the public consultation. That sounds really, really poor, but that's actually a record for the gambling policy. Representations come back. The policy in its current form has worked really well. As you will have seen from the previous stats, we don't have that many gambling premises in the district. They are really well run and they are well managed. So the only proposed amendments that we're offering to the policy is an updated local area profile, which all applicants must have regard to, so that they don't propose to put a new gambling premises in an area of high deprivation, for example. We have updated our safeguarding paragraphs to include the white ribbon commitment that we've made, violence against women and girls, child sexual exploitation, as well as safeguarding in general. And in terms of the consultation responses, I believe that we've either covered off what the representations were asking for, or they are more public health related issues. And public health is not a licensing objective under the Gambling Act, but does sit better with HCC in their public health role. So, Chair, a much shorter speech from me this time. I recommend the policy in its current format and happy to answer any questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Steve. Are there any questions? No. Okay, in which case we'll move to the recommendation, which is that the Licensing Regulation Committee consider the consultation responses and recommend the adoption of the policy appended at Appendix A to full council. Could I have a proposer, please? Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Could I have a seconder, please? Councillor Mason, thank you. We'll go to debate then. Or not. Okay. That's nice and easy. Okay, in which case, Chanel, can we go to the vote then, please?
Chair, that motion's carried.
Thank you, Chanel. Okay, in which case we'll move to item 10, pavement licensing policy. Steve Cobb to present, funnily enough.
Thank you. This is a new policy. We haven't had a pavement licensing policy before as a council. Pavement licensing, which is tables and chairs for the purposes of consuming food or drink on the highway, has always been a remit of Herts County Council under the Highways Act. The pandemic and the pandemic restrictions that restricted the number of people in premises led to the government looking at how could they expand the opportunity for food and drink businesses to operate safely under the COVID restrictions. So they introduced a temporary arrangement where pavement licensing was temporarily given to district councils on the basis of, and no implied criticism of our HCC colleagues, that process was particularly lengthy and was particularly expensive. The government brought in temporary regulations that fixed the price at £100 and gave us 10 working days to make a decision. as opposed to £1,000 plus and 3 months to make a decision previously. It got extended year on year on year, and it has now been made permanent. There is still the opportunity to go to HCC for a licence under the Highways Act, but we now have permanent legislation that allows us to do this. The fixed fee has been removed, and it's now a capped fee where we can set our fee to recover our genuine costs. And I've done some costings, and we can recover our costs within the fee cap that we've been given. What's key is we've also been given some enforcement powers. Previously, because we only had temporary powers to issue pavement licenses, we could issue them. But if somebody put tables and chairs out without a license, or they put tables and chairs out contrary to their license, we had no enforcement powers to deal with it. And we had to ask our colleagues at HCC to go out and enforce, which, as you can imagine, is not an ideal situation. We're taking work away from one council, but then asking them to do the dirty work. It was never going to work. Under this new permanent legislation, we've been given permanent enforcement powers. The process that we had in place won't change. It's prescribed by legislation. The conditions that we had during the temporary arrangements were conditions that we'll work together as councils across the county, and we all had standardised conditions so that we promoted the same sort of licensing regime across Hertfordshire. Just now looking to put that in place permanently. It's worked well. It's caused no issues. It's always been our aim to permit. There are a couple of areas that I could quote, but it's late, so I won't give you the details of the applications, but there have been applications where there have been representations, but we've worked hard with the applicant to find a resolution where they can have their tables and chairs outside, because I think it's important. This policy, as I say, just looks to confirm what we've been doing since the pandemic in terms of policy. It formalises our conditions. It formalises the new fee setting powers. It confirms the new enforcement powers that we've got and how we will use them so that it's open and transparent. But what we're also looking to do is the pavement licensing regime does not have power of appeal to the court. It's very unusual for a licensing regime not to have a power of appeal to the court. So what I'm suggesting, given that we've now got a licensing team leader that runs the licensing operation on a daily basis, is that licensing team leader makes the decisions against the policy that you set. But again, for fairness, that we introduce a right of appeal to myself as the service manager. So rather than just saying no to an applicant, which we try desperately not to do, but rather than the applicant thinking one person sat and looked at my application and said no, and I've got no recourse, we thought it would be fairer to introduce another officer, reviews it on a completely separate basis, so that if the decision is a no, at least the applicant's seen that two separate people have reviewed it and the decision is fair. I think that's all I want to say, Chair.
Thank you, Steve. I can see Councillor Dennis already has a question ready to go.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much. I think that it's in general, an excellent policy. I'm impressed that you've managed to string it out so long, and I do very much enjoy it in respect to two-stage decision-making process as well. I think that is absolutely key, and that a right of appeal ought to be enshrined somewhere in any policy that any organisation pursues. My question, however, though, Mr. Cobb, is in respect of paragraph 1.2.1 Roman numeral 1. Is there a reason why one of the four main towns, Royston, is missing from that section? Does this policy only apply to Baldock, Kitchen, Letchworth, Garden City, plus the surrounding villages, and not Royston? Or was that a mistake?
Thank you for pointing out that, contrary to my own thought process, I am not perfect, and I actually accidentally missed Royston out when I typed this policy. I can assure you that it applies to our friends in Western equally, and I will append that to
That would be
the
that would be
policy.
good. I am representing Councillor Brown on this matter because I know that she would wish that to be raised.
Do we need to do that as an amendment to make sure that that is part of this? Right. Okay. So okay, just take that instruction, please. Gosh. Okay. Councillor Halpert.
Yes, thanks, Chair. First of all, what have we proposed a specific fee as part of this? Have I missed it somewhere? There's maximums, but that doesn't actually. It doesn't actually tell you what the fee is in the paper. It just tells what the maximums are. We aren't necessarily charging the maximum, because I think the paper then goes on to say that we could do it within the maximum, which would imply it would be less than the maximum.
Shall I answer that one first?
Yeah.
Thank you. That's not trying to cut this committee out of the process. It's purely because the delegation for fee setting is delegated to the service director. So this committee can't actually set the fee, but the service director has to set the fee in consultation with the exec members. So any comments that this committee has would obviously be taken on board. Bearing in mind, we can't charge more than our reasonable actual costs of administration and enforcement.
Did you want to come back on that?
Yes, and I've got some other questions.
Okay. Continue on.
So I suppose I mean, I haven't got a specific view about what the fees, because we're looking at cost recovery. So it would be difficult for this committee to take a view on that without actually seeing what the costs are in that. I mean, in that sense. But I guess that's that's obviously something that we can take away. I'd certainly like to be aware of that. Obviously, no doubt I'll be asking with another hat what the fee is. The report suggests in 10.1 that there are no financial implications arising from the adoption of this policy, and there's no additional administrative or enforcement burdens. It sounded like what you were describing, Steve, is actually there is financial implications from this, because we've got to set a fee, and we need to obviously to cost recover. So there is clearly a financial implication. But there obviously is administrative and enforcement burdens within that fee. So I think that probably isn't strictly accurate in 10.1. And I think you said that we've got some new enforcement powers. So whilst that isn't a burden, it clearly is something different and new in that sense. So I think 10.1 isn't quite phrased as well as it might be. Could I also sort of pick up really from I didn't really understand, I think, the 1.4.9, which is the alternative permission outside of this policy and the HCC role. Could you just run that by me again? Because I didn't really quite understand what the process is there on that.
Yes, certainly. You point in relation to 10.1 of the report. Totally accept what you are saying. I took a very overview view of that on the basis that my interpretation was, although there were new financial burdens on the council, because we could recover our full costs, there would be no overall impact. But I accept I could have made that clearer. The reason that there's still a permission in place for Herts County Council to issue what they call tables and chairs licenses under the Highways Act is because the pavement licensing legislation that we can use specifically restricts us to licensing tables and chairs immediately outside or adjacent to a premises for the use of that premises. If you think I keep picking on Hitchin, but if you think, for example, when Hitchin had all of the tables and chairs in the town centre that different premises used at different times, that can't be done under pavement licensing. That can only be done under the street tables and chairs licensing of HCC, because they're not restricted to immediately outside the property in the same way as we are under pavement licensing.
Would you like to come back on that?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess the part of the reason I asked the question is to understand that here as to whether we know what licenses are in issue now and from who, how we introduced this policy and set it to place, and what we're then asking in terms of a transition from where we are now to where we are under this new regime, because this is a new policy that doesn't exist. So I guess I didn't quite get how the transition happens, and going back almost to the HMO world, in how we work through what we don't know in terms of who has or hasn't got licenses, or indeed who's never applied for a license now. So that transition point, I think, is quite key. It's probably less about the policy, but how we really get from where we are now to where we want to be in the future, and also then understanding what people are paying now, and obviously managing the expectation where they're going to have to pay something different in the future, and that's a communication issue somewhere in there as well.
Yeah, really good point. In terms of the pavement licenses that we've already got in place, we've written to them to explain to them about the new regime, and that when they renew, there will be a different fee. But rather than just renewing for 1 year like they can at the moment under this new legislation, we can actually renew their license for 2 years to reduce their burden. We did manage to get a list off of HCC of what street licenses they've issued. They were issued for longer periods of time, and they're not all due to expire yet. So as people hold them and they've paid for them, there's no immediate response for them to change, but we will be contacting those businesses, offering them the opportunity to have a pavement license with us as they get towards the end of their expiry license.
Sorry, can I just come in? By street license, do you mean the table and chair license? You're right. Yeah.
Sorry.
Just making sure that's clear.
No, that's a really good point. My terminology is not always spot on, as has been pointed out this evening. Now, we've got a full team. We do have officers out in the district. So what they will be tasked with is, if somebody has got tables and chairs out when they're not on our list or they're not on the HCC list, we will go in, and the starting point will be, would you like to have a tables and chairs license or pavement license with us? We're not going to go in heavy handed and say, right, you haven't got a license, we're going to deal with you. Obviously, we will look to get everybody licensed. So that will be done by officers on the ground while they're out inspecting taxis or inspecting HMOs or inspecting pubs. They'll be walking around and looking at that sort of thing as well.
Sorry, one last.
Yeah,
thing.
go for it.
And just to understand, Steve, what are the amount that people pay now in comparison? Well, we don't know what they're going to pay in the future, but perhaps let's ask what are they paying now in terms of managing that expectation that whether the charge might be quite a bit different, or it may not be. I don't know.
Point taken.
Philosophy.
Under the temporary legislation, the fee was set at £100 for a 12-month licence. When the service director is back, I will be asking her to set the fee, which, as you rightly said, you can't really comment on when you don't know what it is. What my proposal is to the service director is a 2-year licence. Incorporating our additional enforcement work will be £265. What I should also clarify is the cost of enforcement is officers going out making sure that people have got licenses, because if somebody puts tables and chairs out unlawfully, we now have powers of confiscation and they have to pay to get them back. And if they don't, we can sell them to recoup our costs. So apologies, I realise it would have been more helpful if I'd told you what the fee was proposed to be.
Actually, could I just come back on a point you've just brought up? Sorry, I will come to you. For this confiscation, let's say lots of them, but do we have storage for all of them? Like, for tables and chairs are plenty if it all somehow goes wrong. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
I hope not, no.
Exactly. I would say my experience of working in North Herts for a long period of time in licensing now is the vast majority of our licence holders are honest, law-abiding citizens, and if we point out to them that they are remiss in getting a permission, they will get that permission, and confiscation will be very, very limited.
Okay. Thank you, Steve. All right, Councillor Hoskins.
Thanks, Chair. Well, obviously, as a former town centre manager, this is manna from heaven to me. Anything which provides clarity, because for the I think 20 years that I was a town centre manager, the whole thing was I thought was a dog's breakfast because you had to get a certain permission from the county, then you had to get a certain. Nobody understood what they had to do, and it wouldn't surprise me to learn across the district that there are a lot of people who have got tables and chairs out there that have no idea they've got to have a licence. Some of the things that I'm picking up on this, would it be the same rate regardless of the numbers of tables and chairs and space that they occupy?
Sorry, I wasn't laughing because I thought it was a silly question. I was laughing because that was something that crossed my mind. But it will be the same rate because irrespective of how many tables and chairs are out,
Right.
the amount of work that the office has to do is the same. So it's in effect the same officer's time to process an application, irrespective of how many items of furniture there is.
We're prepared for the complaints that it's not fair. I've only got 2 tables.
Yeah.
He's got 20 or something.
Undoubtedly.
And I'm pleased to hear about you've got enforcement people about, because that was always the issue with county, that they brought these rules in, but there was one enforcement officer for the whole county, I think, at the time. Are you including A boards licensing?
I knew he was going to raise A boards. No, the pavement licensing legislation is specific that it only covers tables and chairs for people to consume food. A boards remains the remit of county. What we are hoping to do within this policy is say that if you've got tables and chairs out and you want to have an A board accompanying your tables and chairs, then that is all encompassed within your pavement license and we can deal with it. But if you're a shop that just puts an A board out with no tables and chairs, then we can't deal with that. That would be county.
There you go. Is another reason for a unitary authority, really, isn't it? I think, but I have to get it in sometime every meeting. I would like to think that that's something we could now lobby for. If you've now got tables and chairs, and the only thing county have got left, it seems to me, is A boards. That's the thing we get most complaints about. That perhaps we could suggest to county that now that you've got the tables and chairs, that perhaps we should take over the A boards at district level as well. I don't know if that's something you can have a conversation about. I'm grateful to Ian Albert for bringing up transition, because that was the whole thing I was thinking about, how we're going to get from where we are to where we want to be. So that's good. And the other thing I was pleased to see is some definitive rules and regulations on peddlers. And again, I know it's a difficult one as far as enforcement is concerned, because by the time you get there, they could have gone. But it's good to see it actually written down, and it's something that we can inform our business improvement districts and town centre management schemes about, so that if they've got people on the ground, they know that they're on firm ground when they challenge these people. Other than that, thank you very much.
Thanks, Keith. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Chair. Just 2 quick points. I'll take the point, Steve, that you'd like to think you wouldn't have to confiscate, but if we did have to, who would actually enforce that? Who would do the confiscation?
It would be us. We would, my team, sorry.
Right, yeah. So
we
resourced, yeah.
We would visit the premises and say that your tables and chairs are out there. If you don't remove them by this date, then we will confiscate them. This is,
yes,
you will have to pay us storage to get them back, blah, blah. We won't just turn up overnight and take
them.
But,
okay. Thank you.
But it would be my team that have to do that.
And just a final quick point, just to thank Councillor Dennis for her interjection in case it was picked up on YouTube. The councillor to my left suggested Royston was a surrounding village. It isn't.
It's like friendly fire, man. Yeah, quite. Right. Are there any further questions from colleagues? Nope. Okay. In which case, I have 3. So, actually, coming from something that Councillor Hoskins said, is it the same for all tables and chairs, regardless of number? The confiscation fee, is that the same regardless of the number of chairs and tables?
If we confiscate the tables and chairs, the fee to get them back will be the fee that we've incurred in terms of storage. So if as we struggle for storage as a council, if, for example, we had to get a storage locker, it would be the cost of that storage locker. So it would be the actual cost plus the officer time.
Okay, so that's so that will change
So
depending.
it'll vary from case to case.
Thank you. Second question. Could you tell me, in the context of this policy, what the meaning of adjacent is?
Yeah, the meaning of adjacent is it's not defined in the Act. We are defining it as immediately outside of that property or immediately outside of that property, but the other side of the road. So basically, if you want to put your tables and chairs around the corner in the marketplace, that's not adjacent. But if it's
so from the effectively from the frontage of or back of that business within a reasonable distance.
Yeah, so it's because we're talking about food and drink, it's reasonable for food and drink to be delivered from that premises out of the front door to the customer, either that side of the road or the opposite side of the road. I
wanted to make that clear because I think there will be people who will stay away from applying if they think it means literally against their wall. That I think is going to be helpful for people who want a bit further away, who need a bit further away.
That's a fair point. We are working on the basis of aim to permit.
Yeah, no, brilliant. And in 4.4 of the report, it says that the Act contains two national conditions that all granted and deemed granted licenses must adhere to if the council fails to publish their own conditions, or the two conditions are a no obstruction condition, which makes sense to me.
Yeah.
And the second one is a smoke-free seating condition. Could you explain what that means, please?
Yeah, again,
in this context, of reason.
we've got local discretion, and because there's already in the tables or in the pavement licenses that we've already granted, there's quite a range of sizes and setups. All we are looking for, rather than being very prescriptive, is each time we get an application for a pavement license, we're looking for two things. A, that there are some tables and chairs within that license that you can set at as a non-smoking area. And it's, again, you won't like this word because it's not a legally definable word, but it's a reasonable distance away from the smokers, which is going to be determined by the size of the premise, the pavement license. If you've just got a small area like we've got here, that just you and I sitting together and you're the smoker on the non-smoker, that's the best we can get. But if it's a longer period, we would look to have a gap between.
And that has to be would that have to be clearly demarcated?
As part of the application, they mark on the plan where they're going to put the tables and chairs, what the tables and chairs are going to be, which is the non-smoking area, and we replicate that on the license. So whoever goes out to enforce it.
So that would be part of the enforcement action as well.
Yeah,
yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Cool. Okay. Are there any further questions? Okay. In which case, where are we? So the recommendation is that the committee be recommended to adopt the pavement licensing policy attached as Appendix A. Could I have a proposer, please? Thank you, Councillor Hoskins. Could I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Johnson. We'll now go to debate. Do I have any debate? No. Okay. In which case, could we have the go to the vote, please?
Chair, that motion's carried.
Thank you, Chanel. Okay, we will now go to our last item of the evening, item 11, street trading policy. Steve Cobb to present.
Thank you. Last and hopefully shortest policy of the evening. There are very, very minimal changes being made to this, and the policy already gives a permission for myself to make the types of changes that we're looking for in consultation with the exec member. We do tweak our policies from time to time with exec member permission. But it didn't seem to me sensible to call a meeting of this committee where you're considering policy and not have the opportunity to comment on this policy as well. We've just reviewed the street trading policy because we have to review all of our policies from time to time to make sure it's still working. It is working really, really well. All we're looking to change is, because we didn't have a formal pavement licensing policy before, reference was made to it in the street trading policy. Well, that reference has been taken out now and just replaced with CR pavement licensing policy. we've started to receive some applications where in areas of ASB, and as I manage the community safety team as well, so I know where areas of ASB are, and we don't necessarily want street trading, late night street trading, burger vans, kebab vans and the like in areas where there is already existing ASB or it's likely to attract more ASB. And the policy wasn't explicit that that would be a reason for say no. So I've just enhanced that part of the policy to say that we would say no if there was good reasons to on the grounds of antisocial behaviour. I have also introduced the internal appeal proposal that we talked about previously under pavement licensing, because again, there is no right of appeal to the courts under street trading licensing. And again, sort of building on the pavement licensing policy, a little bit of a clarification of how our enforcement powers work. We don't have powers of seizure under street trading. It's predominantly powers of prosecution. But again, we've just tried to highlight that if you're breaching your conditions, we may not look to prosecute you. We may just look to take your street trading permission away. And if you become a regular offender, then we would perhaps look to prosecute. So it's a little bit more openness and transparency so that if somebody's looking to operate under street trading, they get all of the answers they need in one document rather than having to read this document and also having to look at the statement of corporate enforcement policy. So we've replicated that part in here as well. That's all. Thank you, Chair. I look forward to some questions.
Thank you, Steve. Do I have any questions for Steve?
Ask questions.
Yeah, I don't know. I think well, I have a question. See, no, you don't get away with it quite that easily. In the part 7 of the report, the background, I just want to get a definition just because I think that might be helpful. So it says on 7.2, on 26th April 2005, the council resolved to make all streets within the conurbations of Baldock, Hitchin, Letchworth City and Royston consent streets, with the exception of any streets designated as prohibited streets. Could you just give a quick definition of consent streets versus, I think prohibited streets might be quite simple, but yeah, consent streets, certainly, please.
Yeah, there's three types of street. Prohibited is as it says in the tin, no street trading is allowed in that street at all. License and consent streets both allow street trading. Licensed streets are more prescriptive, where it can be more formalised and there is a right of appeal to court. Consent streets are effectively, my words, light touch licensed streets, which is easier for our licence holders to go for. It gives us more flexibility. If we went down the licensed street approach, that would make it more administratively burdensome on the businesses.
Brilliant. Thank you, Steve. Are there any further questions? No. Brilliant. Okay. In which case we go to the recommendation that the committee be recommended to adopt the street trading license policy attached to Appendix A. Can I have a proposer? Councillor Dennis. Can I have a seconder? Councillor Mason. Any debate? Obviously not. Everyone's getting ready to vote, so can I have a vote, please?
Chair, the motion's carried.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, everyone. And with that, I will bring this meeting to a close. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your evening.